guess I could take my microphone and someone will pass it to me. Maybe I'll get Mr. Milius will do it. I'm gonna talk to Sparkle about getting another one of these. Good idea. Yeah, these are great. Here, this works. We need one more of these.
No,
Thanks. All right, Mr. Durst has returned to court. All jurors and alternates are present. Mr. Durst is represented by Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin, and we have Mr. Henderson at council table, which is a hint that we're going to see a video. And we have Mr. Milius and Mr. Bailey and Mr. Miata, Mr. Lewin, all are present. I know you're going to do a witness later, but you got right now. I know you do your main guy on the video. So, Mr. Henderson, describe the video you're now going to play.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mark. As People's 110 for identification. It's a flash drive with the conditional examination testimony of Lynda Obst. This video does not have subtitles. Each of the jurors, counsel, defendant, court reporter, and the court has a transcript. The video is 2 hours and 50 minutes long, so it should take us through the end of today and into tomorrow. We'd like to mark the transcript of the video as People's 110A.
All right, so marked.
Your Honor, while you're at the movies, may I go to the back?
Yes, Mr. Chesnoff, I'll excuse you to the back. Mr. Lewis back there already?
No, Mr. Lewis is not.
Okay. Nevertheless, you may go back. Mr. Henderson, you may proceed.
Playing the testimony of Lynda Obst.
We are, Your Honor. Lynda Obst.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
L-Y-N-D, Lynda, L-Y-N-D-A, O-B-S-T.
Thank
You may proceed. Ms. Obst, are you nervous?
A little bit. I've never been here before.
Have you ever testified before?
No, I haven't.
So I'm going to ask you questions. If there's something that you do not understand, let me know. If there's something I don't know, I don't remember, or perfectly acceptable answers, when I'm done, the defense will get a chance to cross-examine you. Just answer questions as honestly as you can. Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
So can you tell me, how did you find your way to be in court today?
Pardon me, I have bronchitis, so I'll be clearing my throat. Well, I was interviewed by Andrew Turecki for The Jinx because the documentary about Robert Durst, because I had known Susan Berman for many, many years as I was the producer of her book on her life called Easy Street.
And what is your background in terms of your education and what you do for a living?
My education is that I went to Pomona College, got a BA, then I went to Columbia University in philosophy, working on my PhD, and I didn't complete it. I went on into become a reporter for the an editor for the New York Times. And then after I was at the New York Times for some very happy years, my husband decided to move me to Los Angeles. It was at that time I met Susan. She was a reporter in New York. I was a reporter in New York, and we were both planning a transition to Hollywood. Me less happy about it than she.
It's worked out for you out here, correct?
It has.
What do you do for a living now?
Now I'm a movie and television producer. I also write books.
And in terms of a movie and television producer, how long have you been doing that?
Oh, over 30 years now.
And do you work for a certain studio? Do you have your own production company? What do you do?
I work for Sony. I make movies everywhere.
I'm not sure what happened there.
Should I project? Oh, there it goes. I make movies for everyone. I have movies at Amblin, at Warner Brothers, at most of the major studios, but I do my television through Sony.
And as a movie producer, can you tell us some of the movies you produced?
Over 30 years, I've made many movies, 18 movies. Some of the ones you might be familiar with. Most recently, I made Interstellar for Warner Brothers and Paramount, Christopher Nolan's most recent film. I made How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I made Hope Floats, One Fine Day, Sleepless in Seattle, The Siege, Adventures of Babysitting. It goes on and on. Because 30 years is a very long time.
And in terms of your position, you say I made those movies. What does that mean?
Well, it means different things in each case, but usually what it means is I start the movie, I find the idea in pop culture, in the newspapers, in magazines, some screenwriters. Well, I left out The Fisher King, my favorite. But anyway, and sometimes in that case I found the script, and then I package it. If it's an idea, I find the writer. If it's a script, I find the director and I package the actors. Then I physically make the movie. I hire a little corporation for a year. We make the movie, then we market it, and we release it.
Mr. Bailey has pointed out in your testimony, you left out his favorite movie, Flashdance.
I left out Flashdance. And did I give out Adventures in Babysitting?
And Ms. Obst, in terms of your, I'm not asking for your net worth, is it fair to say that you are quite financially comfortable?
I'm financially comfortable. Quite is relative these days.
And in terms of, you ever heard of the term 15 minutes of fame?
Yes.
Are you looking for your 15 minutes of fame?
No, I've had many 15 minutes of fame. Every time I have a movie come out, I have to do 15 minutes of fame.
And I didn't ask you, it should have been my first question. And again, we know that Hollywood, this stuff can alter depending on who you're talking to. But we got to get your true and actual age.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
How old?
How old am I?
Yes.
I just turned 67.
In terms of coming to court today, is it fair to say that you were interviewed and told, listen, we need you to come to court?
Yes, I was very reluctant to come.
I want to go back and I want to say the name Susan Berman. You explained a little bit. I'm going to show you a photograph, and I want you to tell me if you recognize this is going to be People's 11. You should be able to see it on your screen.
Is it going to be here?
No, it's going to pop there. Is it on over?
Yes.
Do you recognize anybody in that picture?
I recognize Robert Durst and Susan Berman.
And I'm going to assume Robert Durst is on the left side of the photograph with the beard.
Yes,
And Susan Berman is where?
in the middle.
Do you recognize, you know who the other person is?
I think it's Kathy.
By Kathy, would that be Kathy Durst?
Yes.
And just in terms of the Susan Berman that you remember, does that look, is that an accurate depiction?
100%. It's very characteristic.
Margie, there's a question from the videographer.
The inference of it is that there's a bot that's interfering with the camera. No, never mind, she got it.
Sorry.
FAMSA did not pay for products.
I'm working for
And I'm not the judge pointed out something I'm not aware of. You have to be taken down.
It's supposed to be water, but I don't want to go. All right. We
Yeah, so you're on.
try to maintain our, try to keep sodas out of this area, but that's all right. We'll let it go.
You and Mayor Bloomberg. So, does that look like the Susan Berman that you remember?
100%.
And in terms of kind of explaining the nature of your relationship, Can you tell us in a little more detail how it was the two of you got to know each other?
Yes. Susan had just written her book, Easy Street, about her relationship, about her life as the daughter of a mob boss in Las Vegas, growing up at the hotel that her father ran in Las Vegas, and discovering that her father was a gangster, and her sort of plaza-like, Eloise at the plaza-like existence at this hotel with her very sympathetic mobster father. And I loved the book. And I was just becoming a movie producer. I had been at the Times for about 4 or 5 years. I never wanted to leave the Times, but my ex-husband had taken a job without consulting me with Simon & Schuster Productions and had decided to move to New York. And
That's why he's an ex-husband.
this is exactly why. And and I had just had a baby, or I would have stayed in New York at the Times. But I had to move because I had this baby, and so I got offered a job by Peter Goober to work for him in development.
Is that G-E-E-R?
Yes, it is. And so the first book that I bought, Susan was a writer at the New York Magazine at the time, and I was an editor at the Times Magazine. So we knew of each other. And the first book I bought, it had been a cover story on New York Magazine, was the book coming out from that article called Easy Street. So Susan and I met, and she assigned the rights to myself and a gentleman named Danny Goldberg. I was there for development and to help get the movie sold. And Danny, who she trusted completely, was there to help, and I think also because she needed a strong man to help her get up and down elevators, and she was phobic about various things.
Danny Goldberg, is that E-R-G?
Yes.
And Danny Goldberg, what was his position at?
He was in the music business. He was very successful in the music business, and he'd been a long-term friend of Susan's. She trusted him. She'd known him longer than she'd known me, and she thought together we'd make a guy on her right and a girl on her left, and we'd be able to support her through this process.
And when you say the process, what did the process entail?
Well, it turned out to be a much longer and more convoluted process than most development is. And I think that's true for a couple of reasons. One, because it was my first development project. Two, because it was a project that Susan wanted to write and become a screenwriter on. And it was about her own personal life. And that turns out to be much more than I'd known at the time. An incredibly difficult proposition to write a screenplay about your own family, because it becomes very hard to be...
Why was it a difficult process?
It's a difficult process because it's difficult to write a story that's interesting to other people when you're writing about your own family. It's difficult for you to be objective about it, the way a new screenwriter might be. And as a result, it took Susan and I on a 5-year journey through her own psychology about her parents.
And when you say a 5-year journey during this time, how often were you with Susan?
Sometimes 2 or 3 times a week.
And
For hours.
And when you are saying 2 or 3 times a week, were these casual conversations, were they deep conversations? Describe what they were like.
They were development meetings, but because our story was the substance of her life, they became deep psychological conversations where often we talked about analogous situations, for me to try to bring out the story, for me to get her to demythologize her parents. So often we talked about our love lives, they became sort of deep dish psychological sessions, which development meetings often do become, in which Susan and I really got to know each other on a deep psychological level.
And at that time in your life, in terms of professionally during those 5 years, was Susan one of the people that you were talking to the most?
Yes, it was my first project, and I only had 4 or 5.
And as far as you knew, going the other way, were you during that 5 years that Susan was talking to the most.
Yes, and she was very dependent on me to get her career started.
And tell me what you mean by that, please.
Well, it was her only job in Hollywood, and if she got this movie going, she could have a career as a screenwriter, and that was the career she was trying to begin. And it was a full screenplay at Universal. So it was incumbent upon me to try to turn Susan into a screenwriter, and it was incumbent upon Susan to not let me abandon her as the screenwriter on the script, and I would not.
In terms of this script, and you said it was optioned, was it optioned for a lot of money?
Yes.
How much money did you remember?
I think it was around $300,000.
And that's back in about what year?
I'm thinking 1982, 83.
And I should have asked you before, how are you with actual dates?
Horrible. I can't keep my own calendar. I need a staff member to keep. I don't know what year any of my movies came out.
And you have staff members who keep your...
Who keep my calendar for me. I have staff members who keep my calendar for me.
So, Susan ends up negotiating this deal on the script, and you guys are trying to put things together. During that time, were you able to get an up-close view of who Susan Berman was?
Very much so.
And was that coming directly from Susan herself?
Yes, it was.
If I were to ask you to describe her personality, how would you describe Susan's personality?
Very excitable, very exuberant, a little bit manipulative, in that she knew who would be best to take care of her, and she very much tried to keep the people that could take care of her, that could keep her safe, very close to her, very tightly close to her. She was phobic. She had extreme phobias. She couldn't go up elevators. She couldn't cross bridges. It was difficult for me as a small girl, as much as I thought of myself as a sort of strong and powerful person, because I was so short. I could never reassure Susan that I could actually get her in and out of a restaurant or appropriately call her a cab. She always felt much safer with a large man. She would, return food at restaurants if it wasn't perfect. She was a very large, very enjoyable personality. She was also brilliant, and brilliant to talk to.
In terms of the people you've met in Hollywood, the friends that you've had, would it be fair to describe Susan as a low-maintenance friend?
Absolutely not.
Would it be fair to describe her as, she's kind of medium maintenance?
No.
How would you describe Susan?
I would describe Susan as high maintenance.
And you've been in Hollywood for how many years now?
About 35.
And I'm going to ask you kind of, even with the Hollywood scale, how high maintenance of a person was Susan?
I'd say she'd be up there in the 8 to 10 category of high maintenance. Now we have to, she was very taken care of by her father and her uncle when she was very young, and then she lost them, so she looked for replacements.
Please wait for the next question before you
Sorry.
elaborate.
If I were to ask you, was loyalty something that Susan taught you about?
Yes, often.
And what would she say to you about
Loyalty was everything to Susan. She learned it from her father. It was the mafioso way. If you had a friend who took care of you, you took care of them for life. She was extremely loyal to a number of lifelong people, people for life in a lifelong way.
And I want to be clear, there are people, Ms. Obst, you can know somebody, and you can give your impressions of what someone's like. It's kind of one thing. The second thing you can do is you can know somebody, and you can repeat what that person has told you. So, in terms of what you've been testifying to thus far about what was important to Susan and what her outlook was, etc., have those been actual statements that Susan has made to you? So, for instance, what you just said about Susan's views on loyalty, she told you?
Both.
Did Susan talk to you about how she viewed her father in particular?
We talked about her father and her mother most of all.
And did she talk to you about needs that she had for being with men like her father as friends and other things?
She talked to me about her attractions to men based on how similar they were to her father.
Did she ever discuss with you the concepts of love and keeping secrets and how they intersect?
Yes.
What would she say about that?
She said that she watched her mother show her love to her father by keeping his secrets. And she came to understand that that was a big part of love. That if you could protect somebody, if you could protect somebody, if you could be loyal to somebody, and she gave me examples of the way her mother protected her father and kept her secrets, that was love.
At the time that you were working with Susan, did Susan ever tell you that she had current connections or dealings with the mob at that point?
No.
And given the relationship you had with her, had she had those kinds of dealings or connections, would that have been something that you believe you would have known?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us why?
Because we could have used it in the book.
In terms of Susan's knowledge of the mob, did she have, what I would characterize as kind of specific secrets about mobsters that she ever relayed to you?
She only talked to me about Davy, about the people that were Davy's enemies during the time that he was in danger while he ran the Flamingo, about Chucky and how Chucky died with no protection and giving her no money.
Let me just back you up.
Chucky is her uncle,
When you say Davy, is
her
that,
father.
is he also known as Davy the Jew Berman?
Yes,
And we are talking about a man who died in the late 40s or early 50s. correct?
exactly.
And in terms of, is it Chucky or Chicky?
Chicky. Thank you.
And are you able to spell that? I'm asking you because I'm not sure if I can spell it, so I'll have to
She always referred to him as Uncle Chicky, who she went to live with after. And he had nothing.
I think it's C-H-I-C-K.
I.E. So if there were anyone else that were either bugging her or
So
I'm sorry,
this
go ahead.
is not your testimony.
I understand.
This is a question and answer.
I understand.
Is there more you can elaborate on as to why you do not believe she had any current connections or contact with the mob at the time either?
Because I saw her grasp at straws, trying to find other mafia angles we could use in the story.
Was Susan a manipulative person?
Excuse me?
Was Susan manipulative?
Somewhat, yes.
And can you explain how she was manipulative?
She was emotionally manipulative.
Have you ever used the term that she charm manipulated?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you mean by that?
If you were a person that she deemed necessary in her life, emotionally or financially or career-wise is necessary in her life, she could be unbelievably charming to keep you there. She was brilliantly charming with our head of production, Tom Mount. She was brilliantly charming with me when she needed me to never fire her from the screenplay and move it on when I realized it had no future.
Based on your experience, was Susan someone who could use her manipulative skills to get money?
Yes, I think this was most of her charm, except for love, was in order to survive. She was always in survivalist mode.
I want to back up. We were talking about Susan's focus. Was Susan the kind of person, when you knew her, I'll give you an example, like someone from a rural area in the Midwest who doesn't lock their doors and kind of thinks of everybody as friendly. You're smiling and you appear to have laughed when you're telling me what problem you have.
No, she was very paranoid. She shut her doors. I remember her once telling me I had not sufficient security.
And knowing the Susan that you know, was she the type to open the door to a stranger?
I mean, I certainly don't think so.
And in terms of the Susan that you know, was she the type of person that when she was home would have her door locked?
Absolutely.
All right, I want to go ahead and I want to ask you, when I say the name Robert Durst, do you recognize him up there? You said,
Yes.
and is that how he looked? Have you ever met him in person?
I think I met him once or twice. We met at the party that he gave for Easy Street, for certain.
And do you recognize, I'm pointing to Mr. Durst right now, do you recognize him or not really?
Vaguely.
Can you tell me, when did you first hear the name Robert Durst?
Susan began talking about him the day we met, virtually.
When Susan first mentioned Robert Durst, first time you heard him, how did she talk about him?
She wanted me to meet him very, very much. She spoke about him in great hyperbole. She thought he was very much the most important person in her life. She was crazy about him. She said he was incredibly rich, incredibly handsome, incredibly everything, incredibly incredible. And that he was going to give the greatest party for Easy Street, that he was a real estate scion, and he was so cool, and I would love him so much. And she was so over the top about it that I said, but Susan, we could have Nora or Nora and Carl or any of the big literati people that we know give us a party. Because it's a book party. Pardon me? Nora Ephron, who was one of my best friends at the time. We could have a literary party. You don't need to have a party from a real estate guy, because I wasn't really very taken with second-generation real estate guys. And she was like, no, he's my best friend. I love him so much. We're unbelievably tight. And it never stopped.
Okay, you've answered that question.
Yes.
Did you want to clarify for that the previous
Is that
answer?
fine? P-H-R-O-N.
That's right. Because there was another name you gave and I didn't recognize it.
What's the other name?
Carl.
Bernstein,
Is
Ah,
that P-E-R-N-S-T?
T-E-I-N.
I see. Okay.
And in terms of the people that Susan talked about that were living, I'm going to exclude people she talked about that were living. Where did Bobby Durst rank in terms of how often she spoke about something?
Bobby Durst was, of the 3 people we talked about, or the 4 people we talked about Davy, Gladys, her mother, and Bobby Durst and her.
One moment, I apologize.
Yes.
Oh. Did Susan elaborate on the idea of keeping secrets in terms of with respect to her mother and her father?
Yes, we talked about that a great deal, because Susan believed that her mother went to,
What did she say about it?
she said that her mother died, committed suicide, knowing all of her father's secrets. And she was a martyr for that reason, and that's why she respected her mother. that that was her way of giving love to her father. That was the best thing she could do for her father. And then, I'll stop until you ask me another question.
And in terms of the relationship that she had with Bobby Durst, if I were to ask you to kind of characterize it, casual, acquaintance, best friend, almost family member, how would you characterize it? The way Susan talked about it.
I thought Susan was in love with him. She called him her best friend, but she talked about him so much and to the exclusion of any other guy that I thought that I told her I thought she was in love with him and that she seemed to associate him with her father.
As far as you know, was there ever any type of relationship between the two of them that went any further, that was romantic?
I think in Susan's mind, but not in reality.
Did Susan ever tell you that Bobby needs her?
Often.
And have you ever described the way that Susan talked about Bobby Durst, that she idolized him in the way that teenage girls idolize their bad boyfriends?
I told her that.
Have you ever described Robert Durst as being the beginning and the end of the earth for Susan?
Yes.
For Susan Berman, and is that an accurate depiction?
That's how it seemed to me.
Did Susan ever tell you that she wanted to do things for Robert Durst, that she had done things for Robert Durst, either way, that her mother had done for her father?
That was similar to what her mother did for her father. Yes.
And what did she say specifically that you can remember?
Well, in the context of many, many conversations where we had made the analogy of she was like Gladys to Davy in terms of being needed by him and helping him, she once told me that she called Albert Einstein Medical Center for him and said she was Kathy.
I want to back up 1 second. We're going to get to the area you spoke of. I want to back up. Did you have a chance to observe Robert Durst and Susan Berman together?
A bit, not very much.
And when you did see them together, how many times do you think that was?
I think once.
And is that an estimate on your part? Oh, you need to say out loud.
Yes.
And can you tell me, when they were together, the time that you saw, what was the interaction like?
My perspective was always watching Susan because I wasn't that interested in Robert Durst. Okay. She was exhilarated. I didn't notice his reaction.
No, so I'm asking you, what was Susan's reaction? You said she appeared exhilarated. What leads you to that conclusion?
She would hold on to his arm. She would lean into him. She would whisper things in his ear.
Did you ever see Susan interact with another man like that?
No.
I want to ask you, to the best of your memory, did you ever actually sit down and talk with Mr. Durst?
No.
Did you have any interest in meeting him?
No.
And can you tell us why?
He didn't interest me.
And why was that?
I just felt that Susan wildly exaggerated what was interesting about him. I'd met lots and lots of rich real estate second generation guys, and where I grew up, they were sort of a dime a dozen, and I guess I was more interested in their fathers and self-made men.
You said before that, to correct you, used the term, you thought that Bob Durst was just another rich Jewish boy in real estate, and you've grown up with a lot of those guys.
Precisely.
When you met Bob Durst, do you recall if you ever had any conversation with him?
I don't I probably, no, probably doesn't count.
Do you remember if you ever met Kathy Durst?
I really, unfortunately, don't remember.
And is it fair to say that if you had been at a place where Kathy Durst was, the boat party or wherever, you didn't have any interaction with her for you to remember, oh, I met her?
Correct.
Can you tell me, did Susan ever speak about Kathy?
Okay.
And what would Susan say about Kathy?
I remember, not during the New York period, but once we were in Los Angeles together, and by then, I think I had known that Kathy was missing. I'm not sure. So I didn't really realize that till a long time after. But she had said that Kathy just disappeared, was a cokehead, and disappeared.
Let me ask you, when Kathy disappeared in 1982, were you living in Los Angeles or in New York?
I was living in Los Angeles.
And to your memory, was that a media story that you recall?
No.
Please wait till the question is completed before you answer.
I'm sorry.
Please wait until the question is completed before you give your
I'm
answer.
so sorry.
For our report.
And is it fair to say that by the time you were working on the screenplay with Susan, you had knowledge of Kathy's disappearance?
I don't remember at exactly what moment in our collaboration I was able to sort of figure that out. It was never a subject of our conversations, oddly.
Do you recall, at a certain point in time, having the conversation or Susan mentioning information about Kathy's disappearance?
No.
Do you recall, you mentioned a moment ago that Susan made a comment about calling Albert Einstein.
Right.
Can you tell me, to the best of your memory, did that occur during the process, the 5-year period that you were working with Susan on the screenplay?
Yes.
And if you can you recall, as best you can, what did she say to you?
It came up in the context of, she did the sorts of things for Bobby that Gladys did for Davy. And the example that she gave was that when Bobby asked her to or needed her to, she made this phone call to Albert Einstein in Kathy's name.
You stopped what you say in Kathy's name.
Or saying she was Kathy.
And I just want to be clear, is this information that Susan told you?
Yes.
And if I were to ask you, how sure are you that she told you that information?
I'm sure.
At the time that you had this conversation with Susan, you said it was during the 5 years. Did you write it down and date it?
Definitely not.
Do you recall, to the best of your memory, how many conversations did you have regarding this issue?
We had many conversations on the ancillary psychological issue that it entailed, but the actual phone call had no import to me. So what was important to me was the conflation between Bobby and her father and Gladys and herself, because that's what helped the screenplay. At the time, I had no awareness of the importance of the phone call.
When you were previously asked about this, you made the comment in explaining, and I'm paraphrasing, you said that in essence that I wasn't listening. And I just wanted, do you recall saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And I just want to clarify, when you say I wasn't listening, does that mean that you're not sure of what you heard?
I meant I wasn't focusing on that sentence in the particular conversation that we were having, because we'd had so many conversations trying to figure out the family puzzle, and this was just a fact that came up in the larger conversation. So I didn't focus on that fact.
And At the time that Susan told you that she had called Albert Einstein, pretending to be Catherine, did you know the level of knowledge that you have now about Catherine's disappearance?
Absolutely not.
Did you know really anything about it?
Nothing. That's why I didn't focus on it.
You previously stated that Susan told you, quoting her, I called the Albert Einstein Medical Center, just to get them off his back, referring to the police. Do you recall making that statement?
Yes.
What did you mean by the statement that Susan had said she called Albert Einstein Medical Center just to get them off his back?
I think I conflated two different periods of time.
Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I think at other times she told me that the cops were on Bobby's back, and at that particular time she told me that she did it because that's what love was, and she was doing what Gladys had done for Davy.
Did you know, even as you sit here today, did you know or do you know the timing of the original New York investigation and what the investigation began for this disappearance?
Absolutely not.
When Susan made the statement to you about having called the pretending to be Kathy, can you describe what was her demeanor like?
Well, we were in the middle of a completely different conversation about making psychological discoveries. So her demeanor was kind of excited. It was like, yes, it was like that. Bobby is like my dad to me, and Goddess is like me in that circumstance. So it wasn't like I think she was even aware she was making a confidential statement. It was in the midst of a psychological revelation.
And in making that statement, I just want to be clear, was it you that connected the idea of Gladys keeping secrets for Davy and Susan helping and keeping secrets for Bob Durst, or was it Susan who was making that connection?
I made the connection that it seemed to me like she was turning Bobby, and that she had turned Bobby into her father, and she was becoming Gladys. And she said, yes, that's right. Like the time, something like that. I had done this. It was just like what Gladys did for Bobby, for Davy.
At the time that that you had this conversation with Susan, do you remember anything else that she told you or that you asked about this revelation?
Not that necessarily pertained to Mr. Durst.
At the time that she said this to you, did you recognize the import of what she told you?
Yeah.
Did Susan do you have a memory of how many times you had this conversation with Susan with this issue called being came up? Any idea how many times? Was it one, more than one? Do you know?
I don't think we repeatedly discussed it.
And if I were to ask you, how certain are you of these memories you've talked about with respect to Susan telling you she called you to protect you, Kathy? What would you say?
I'm as certain as I can be.
Do you recall, Ms. Obst, as you sit here, whether or not Susan said that she called the Albert Einstein Medical Center, or whether she said she called the Albert Einstein Medical Center? Do you recall which one?
No, it was 40 years ago.
And as you sit here, do you remember the words Albert Einstein?
Yes, hardly. I only remember it.
Have you previously said that you have no doubt that Susan told you she made the call?
Yes.
And is that, as you sit here today, is that your belief?
Yes.
did you end up, do you recall, when I say the jinx, you've heard of that?
Excuse me?
The jinx.
Yes.
And you previously indicated that you gave an interview to
Yes.
Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smirl, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you watch the Jinx episode where they talked about the call to Albert Einstein matters?
Yes.
And can you tell me, when you watched that episode, can you tell me what happened?
Yes. That was a very disturbing episode to me because that was the point at which I realized that people did not know that she called the Albert Einstein Medical Center, and that I immediately realized upon seeing that episode that I knew this fact. I was struck. My heart started racing, and I knew that I knew this. I knew that Susan had told me this. And I knew it with a conviction of my entire being. And it was terrifying to me because I assumed that everyone knew that.
When you felt this realization, did that occur as you were watching the episode itself?
Yes.
And to your memory, did you watch the episode at the time that it was originally broadcast?
Yes.
I know that you are probably used to meetings where you're getting a lot of extraneous information and you want to go through it quickly, which I understand. I haven't known you do some extraneous information. But I definitely need for you to, I've got to finish the question before you answer, even though you know where I'm going. Did you end up watching that episode in February of 2015 when it aired?
Yes.
And is that when you had the response that you related?
Yes.
When you had that response, did you realize that you had important information?
I was afraid I might.
And when you said I was afraid I might, can you expand on that? What do you mean?
Well, I was very reluctant to get involved, but at the same time, I realized that people did not know Susan made that call. So I wondered if this information was important. So first, I thought I had to speak to people and find out if it was an important piece of information that I had. So
Okay, let's, why don't you, just, you've answered the question. You may proceed with the next question.
Yeah, we have one more, please.
Yes.
When you heard this information, was it a situation where you were unsure of whether you had important information? Or was it a situation where you were looking for somebody to tell you you don't have to come forward?
a little bit of both.
And when you said that you ended up speaking to people, to the best of your memory, who did you speak to?
Well, first I called Andrew Jarecki, and I told him what happened after I saw the episode, and that I had remembered this thing that Susan had told me, and did he think that was important? And he said, oh, for crying out loud, call John Lewin.
Had you sat down for an interview with Andrew Jarecki in 2011?
Yes.
And during that time, had the issue of the phone call to Kathy, had you been asked about that?
No.
And had it come up at all?
No.
So during the interview you had with Andrew Jarecki in 2011, you didn't mention anything about the call, is that correct?
No, I had forgotten it completely.
Let me ask you something. over the years, since Susan disappeared, have you been contacted by different media outlets who wanted you to do interviews?
Yes.
And other than speaking to you directly in Snarl, to the best of your memory, have you talked to any other media people?
Never.
And why is that?
Because I did not want to be associated with this case. And I don't do media interviews that have anything to do with other than my movies.
So you said that you called Andrew directly, and Andrew directly said, hey, you need to call me. You said yes.
Yes.
Did you pick up the phone and call me?
No.
Did you try to get another opinion that hopefully would be you don't need to call?
Yes.
Who did you call next?
Then I spoke to one of my best friends who's a prosecutor in another district. And I tried to have him talk me out of it.
And who was that individual?
His name is Ryan Ehrlich.
And I think it's E-R-L-I-C-H.
Mhm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And at the time, did you know specifically where Mr. Ehrlich worked?
I knew he worked in Pasadena.
Have you since learned that Mr. Ehrlich is actually a younger deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office?
Yes.
When you spoke to Mr. Ehrlich, did you relate to him the information?
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
Call John Lillen.
Did you then pick up the phone and call me then?
No.
Who was the next person you called?
Then I called my attorney,
And who was that person?
Lev Ginsburg.
Can you spell that, please?
Gilev, Ginsberg.
And did you explain to Mr. Ginsburg the information you had?
Yes.
And what did Mr. Ginsburg tell you?
Call John Lillen. First I asked him how I could get out of calling John Lillen.
And did you immediately call me after you spoke to Mr. Ginsburg because you waited a little more time?
I waited more time.
And you ended up contacting me in my office, correct, in March of 2015?
Yes, sir.
And did you sit down and were you interviewed by myself and Mr. Balian?
Yes.
And was District Attorney Investigator Jeff Savarese, S-A-V-A-R-E-S, was he there as well?
Yes, sir.
And did you become aware that that interview was tape recorded?
I later learned that, yes.
Did you know it at the time?
No.
And during that interview, did we ask you questions regarding many of the topics that I've brought up today?
Yes, you did.
And did you attempt to explain, to the best of your ability, what your memory was of the events that transpired?
Yes, I did.
Do you have a better memory as you sit here today of what Kathy told you? I'm sorry, what Susan told you? Or, for instance, the order of which person you contacted after you remember what happened? What do you have a better memory of?
Yes, I think in my first interview, I was just beginning to remember these things that happened 40 years ago and the sequence in which they happened.
And have you attempted to tell us, and in your testimony today, have you attempted to relate the truth of what occurred to the best of your ability?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us what was your reluctance in coming forward when you recognized the information you had?
I don't think anybody really wants to get involved in a murder trial. Certainly not a working producer who's facing a writer's strike in 3 days with many projects they want to pursue and need to, work to do. And also, I find the defendant a very scary person.
Well, I want to back to the mention of writer's strike. Back in 2015, when this happened, it was not a writer's strike.
No,
So I want to ask you, were you afraid of the defendant?
I was afraid of the defendant.
In what particular, what information did you have that led you to this conclusion, this fear?
Well, by that time, I knew Susan was dead. And I knew that she knew a lot about him. And,
concerned, based on what you knew, that Mr. Durst was involved in
Yes.
the disappearance of his wife.
Well, yes, because I knew that Susan knew something about Kathy.
And by the time that this is all coming forward, is this well after the defendant's trial in Galveston, Texas?
Yes.
Were you aware that Mr. Durst admitted to being involved in a situation where somebody was killed and that he dismembered the body afterwards?
Yes.
Did that cause you any concern?
Yes.
Did that factor into your reluctance to come forward?
Yes, but I also was reluctant to come forward because I just like to proceed in my quiet life and make movies and not get involved in things that are dangerous, and I'd rather read about than participate in.
Were you aware of, when I say the OJ trial, were you aware of that case?
I was.
Did you have concerns that you were going to be injecting yourself into a potential circus?
Yes.
As you sit here today, are you still afraid of Mr. Durst?
I try not to think about it.
Did the fact that, are you aware that Mr. Durst was involved?
Yes.
Did that in any way factor into your concerns?
Well, he has means, even from prison.
In the end, what was it that made you come forward?
That desire to do the right thing, as impressed upon me by all the advisors I chose, and also caring about Susan.
I want to go back. When did you and Susan stop contact?
I was engaged to be married when my son was about 10 years old, so I'll try to think of the year, 1988,
And by the way,
1989.
are you definitive in these dates, or you
No, they're rough. All my dates are rough. But around 1988, 1989, I was engaged to be married to the scion of a real estate family, a Jewish scion, oddly, going against all my principles. And it turned out that Susan had grown up with him and hated him in the most profound way. And she called me and told me that he was crazy and that she hated him and that I had to break up with him right away.
did you follow her advice?
I did not.
Should you have?
Yes. She turned out to be right. But I didn't find that out for 2 years.
I want to go to Susan's murder. And I want you to tell us, if you can remember, how did you find out that she was murdered?
I read it in the newspaper.
And when you read it in the newspaper, what was your response?
Horror.
And at or near that time, was there anybody that you suspected?
Was there anybody I suspected?
When Susan was murdered, who did she be murdered?
I suspected Mr. Durst.
And was that immediate?
Yes.
And have you previously told us during your interviews that in fact you immediately suspected him?
I just know that I did, so I must have told you that in previous interviews.
Can you play LV040, please? This is going to be the, I'm sorry, let me back up. This is going to be the, it's not ours, it's going to be the interview with Director Smoke. This is going to be August 19, 2011. It's going to be on page 13. There isn't a further.
Have we marked this as an exhibit?
We're going to mark it right, I'm sorry.
You're gonna mark the whole interview 15 and 15A? Let me, just a moment, Rod. marking exhibit. Equals 15 and 15A transcript and report.
So, at the time that you were contacted by myself, Mr. Bannigan, investigator Salaries, prior to us arriving, you making contact with us, did you realize that we have been investigating out here in Los Angeles Susan Berman's murder?
No,
Had you ever been contacted by law enforcement prior to that time?
no,
Had you ever been contacted by law enforcement regarding the investigation into Kathy Durst's disappearance?
no,
I want to ask you, you're talking about loyalty, and what Susan said about loyalty. If I were to ask you, based on what Susan told you, if I were to ask you to pick, is there one person that you think that Susan had more loyalty than anybody else? Is there someone you would suggest?
yes, Robert Durst. No sisters.
I have no further questions.
Right, it's time for our mid-afternoon break, 3:10 p.m. So we'll come back at 3:25 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. 3:25.